we're going to be talking to our dear friend Philip Ittner, who is, I think, going to be on the red carpet at Cannes this time next year. If
I
we can,
think
if
so.
our plan continues to work, we have
Wearing his fake hat.
our easy, our Mister.
What?
What are you wearing? A real
I'm
hat?
gonna talk to him about this hat.
I'm the one wearing nature's hat right now, nature's hoodie. At this point, honest to God, I was like, I wonder what I would look like in a hoodie. Oh, I look like this. The Over the last year, there has been quite a lot of talk in these parts on this particular show about a belief I have had that has grown over time from I think the dare I say the nest of innocence, the egg of naivete to a full grown stork of I don't know. I'm looking for the
You had
analogy,
me.
and it's just dying on the
You
highway.
had me.
I was trying. You know what? It was stuck in my head was that the spoon-billed stork or whatever. You know, the big, giant, weird-looking, like alien-looking stork that everybody takes pictures of with the huge
Yes.
bill that's like
Yeah,
human size. And I literally that image came into my head like a Mid-Journey mismatch, and I panicked for a moment because it's the only thing that scares
good.
me.
I'm glad you panicked and it didn't feel like home.
So, I've been saying a couple of things over the last year. One, that it is my personal belief that we have been involved as the United States in our in a crisscross between our, I guess, jingoistic, hyper patriotic naivete on one side of the spectrum, and our isolationist, all we do is bad stuff in the world, other side of the fringes of the conversation about politics in this country. We have marched headlong into probably the biggest geopolitical rope-a-dope that humankind has seen since the Trojan horse. And specifically, I am talking about in the early 90s, when the fall of the USSR happened, and everybody was like, oh, good, the Cold War is over. And we started acting towards Russia with an absolute, nearly instantaneous naivete. Like, oh, well, that's gone. So you guys are totally different now.
Yeah.
Mistaking a falling internal regime for a similar revolutionary fight that the Americans put on back in the days of the colonies, which is intrinsically different. When you are fighting to expel, as our dear friends in Ukraine know quite well right now, when you are fighting
and as I did this morning.
I don't need to know that. I don't.
I was fighting to expel.
I don't believe you. I think it all happened whether out of your control. But we'll talk about that in the after show, as we do during the therapy session of Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide. It's not a good time to remind people to support the show through Patreon right now, is it?
Right in the middle of my sketch joke.
So in 1991, when the USSR fell, the attitude towards the United States and our Western allies was largely, okay, the Soviet Union is done. That's who we were fighting with. We were not fighting with the Russian people or any of their personalities or anything. Just that ideology fight had been going on for a long time, and it's over now. And so we jumped right into, American artists were performing over there. You and I watched the Moscow Music Peace Festival.
Yeah, they're still waiting for their pizzas.
Yeah, they're still waiting for their pizzas. If you haven't seen Ozzy's analogies about the USSR versus the West.
I just brought up an inside joke that Hal and I have had since we were 17 years old.
That's absolutely true. So, wonderful, a wonderful period. But at the same time, when you look at who was coming up in that system, it is abundantly clear that not everyone was happy about the collapse of that whole big USSR thing.
No.
And set about to right that wrong, however long it would take them. And the primary, the prime mover in this group of people was Vladimir Putin himself, who has said that the fall of the Soviet Union is the biggest tragedy in the history of his country and the history of the world. And right about that time, there was a teetering shift where the leader of China at the time said, hide your strength and bide your time. The idea being that we will become, we'll let everybody build stuff here. We'll just absorb the world's goods in effect, a way of probably the closest thing to a successful version of Marx's plan, which is to build you can only build socialism on the back of capitalism. Again, it's such a weird aspect of Marx's philosophy that I find goofy beyond measure, which is, it's the Marxism, like socialism and communism only can work once capitalism creates everything, which is like saying the key to living a truly pure vegan lifestyle is to get as big as Arnold Schwarzenegger, eating nothing but beef and calves livers, and then one day just decide to call yourself a vegan. It's very odd. It's an intrinsic aspect of the philosophy that I just find flawed, let's say. So, right about that time, and yes, I did do a hair flip, Johnny Million. You just saw it on camera at infotainmentwars.com. And it's hard not to. And it's interesting that the timing of both of these things was happening very close together. The fall of the USSR and the concern on from the Chinese part that they were next, that the CCP would fall equally because it was equally incompetent, equally disinterested in the health and welfare of its own people, and reliant on the Western world to even exist in the first place. And so they set about two kind of divergent messaging standards. One was, welcome all comers. We're part of the global community. We're your business partner. That was the Chinese version of it. And the Russians were, we're going to have to set snares so that if anybody tries to get out from under our influence, they face death. Now,
cool.
both are true, by the way. Both are the same argument. They're just verbalized differently, because ultimately what China's has been trying to do over the last 15 years especially is, you build everything here so you can't mess with us. If you mess with us, we will, we'll stop, I don't know, letting your goods leave the country. Whatever they never really could express what would happen, because they knew the health and well-being of their people was tied so intimately with the economies of the West, that they couldn't really out and out say it, but it was a lot of tug and pull. Like, we're going to make this difficult for you. And in the margins on trillions of dollars of trade, margins can mean a drop in your nation's, or a rise in your nation's unemployment by a point or two. And we know, in this country, that after things like 2008 or the Great Depression, that if unemployment goes up, there's literally a statistical number, and I'm blitzing on it right now, that ties the number of suicides to a percentage rise in unemployment. That you can literally, like, it's a balanced part of the populace overall. Yeah, it is. You can
capitalism killing people.
Well, I wouldn't call it capitalism, because without that, it is literally just the inability to provide. Oh, in other countries, like in China,
Yeah.
Who
did that?
That's not us.
Now it's gone.
It is. That's so weird. See, and I didn't touch anything.
Right? Yeah, I know. Your hair could have.
That's true. It's got Medusa-like properties. So, point being is that it is abundantly clear. That is very strange. It only happens sometimes. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out during the break. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Locked into the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide.
All right, so it wasn't me, which is good, which is very strange. I'm glad. What I was saying essentially was that we, in our national, maybe it's a mix of the sort of egoism of American exceptionalism on the right and the denial of American exceptionalism on the hyper left, or those groups. We're basically in, if you go online, a ping pong match between those two groups of idiots.
Mm-hmm.
And since they have largely controlled the conversation for the last 30 years, we have missed the fact that other countries have plans on the world, that that there is not a singular, imperialistic reflex and hegemonic reflex somehow magically the minute you take your oath as a U.S. citizen, as an immigrant, if you show up here and you take your oath, suddenly all of a sudden you're like, all right, what countries can we take over? Let's do this. Let's start with my old one first. It's not something that's just built in. As a matter of fact, there's a lot more laissez-faire in the American politic than I think people are even aware of. And if you don't believe me, go to a sports stadium or a concert these days. And it's really because of COVID, I think, even more stark than it has ever been. But in the process, you've got two particularly centralized governments with no diversity of thought within their functioning system, namely the CCP and the Russian system, where both countries have set a path to either because they believe they've been wronged by history, or they have low self-esteem about their existence in the world, or it's just too much work to produce a lot of stuff that a lot of people want and get power that way. So they've just got to seize everything and kill everybody. And maybe that's a reflex every country goes through, that, obviously when the Germans wag a finger at us, we're like, calm down. And when we wag a finger at somebody else, we have to do it with a recognition that we have a history that we have to make up for. But part of it is moving past that. The whole point is that nobody gets to skip history. And I think we're all finding out right now. I saw a shirt the other day where somebody was wearing that said, I'm tired of living through once in a lifetime events, And I'm sorry, but you can't. Nobody gets to skip history. And the definition. Nope. The definition of your country, the definition of your philosophy is not this idea that you have no regrets, but that you recognize your failures, regret them, so that you never do them again. That right, exactly. That's why I'm a big fan of regret. I gotta, regrets. I've had a few, and they genuinely have worth. There's a problem though when your only regrets are, I should have killed that guy when I had the chance. Which right now in the world of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, there's a lot of that going around. Like, that is the primary gripe.
Yeah.
And in many ways, thank God, it's too late. Yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of Russia's attack on Ukraine. And during, the last couple of days on my live stream and on the morning show, which I do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on twitch.tv/Hal Sparks. And Johnny Million's got a new Twitch channel, and we're going to raid him and do all kinds of things.
It's going to be crazy. Hal's going to be on the live stream, and we're going to...
it's going to be a show. And then your audio is going to fail, and I'm just going to smile.
You're going to giggle.
Scramble and pull plugs and freak out and try to keep your thought aligned while craziness happens. But that we've been looking at, the lead up to the few days right before this, and the conversation that has been had multiple times, in the month before, where Biden and everybody, Blinken, all those folks, they were talking directly to Lavrov and all those guys and hearing what the Russians were saying versus what the Russians were doing. And there was if you look back at the videos of their spokespeople, their ambassador, when he was on Face the Nation, literally the day before they moved their troops into the already occupied areas to start the big roll past that, he directly, there is no invasion and there is no plan for an invasion. Now, on the one hand, that's almost true, because they had a plan, but it sucked. It was, you could say there was no plan because they thought they could do it easily. And, well, who needs a plan? We'll just roll in and do this. Biden's weak. The NATO alliance has been, lessened and everybody's scattered and Brexit, and we teed up all the parts as best we could, and we really don't have much time. We got to do this. Our demographic and lack of technological advancement calls for us to seize the lands of other people and live off their backs, a form of war slavery, which is effectively the business that Russia is in now. If you don't believe me, ask the Chechens or the Georgians or the Dagestanians or anybody who's in a former Soviet republic that has declared its independence and has been living independent ever since. And even to some degree sections of Syria. And by the way, if you don't believe it, ask our soldiers who gave up a base during the Trump administration that the Russians took over. So we got to build, the U.S. taxpayer built the biggest Russian base in Syria. That's what they do now. This is a war of enslavement. We will either take your people and use them as broodmares in the case of the women and children, and we will kill your men or force them to fight for us to continue this going forward in a very Genghis Khan methodology. Or we will just obliterate all of you and take your land and use the fact that you cultivated over years and created farms and all this kind of stuff and just steal your tractors, start farming on your land, and with no memory of who set it up. A form of it's like working your way into someone's will and then murdering them. That's the softest version of what Russia has been trying to do in Ukraine.
Most of the true crime stories that I listen to are that. People working their way into wills and then becoming the caretaker.
Yes, and on a side note, because you're great at those, Johnny Million, may I say that a lot of those things seem a lot more work than just making that money.
Yeah, right?
You know what I mean? Yeah, you know what I mean? And all the danger
work at
involved in it.
Target.
Yeah, well, let's say, I don't know what the number is. What's your number, Johnny Million? 1.5 million? Whatever the insurance number. Once it gets up to a certain point, you're like, oh, I can see that. Yeah, this person's never going to make $1 million. So they're just rubbing their hands together.
Yeah.
Yep. But if you're capable of creating that kind of a plot and actually think you can get away with it, why don't you think you can, I don't know, invent an extra key for the piano? At a certain point, maybe it's an ego, I don't know, maybe there's an ego window. You know how they say there's an asteroid headed for the Earth right now, by the way, and it's the one that we're going to nudge because we practiced with the other one. I don't want to scare everybody, but it comes by the Earth in 2035. And it's going to either go straight towards the Earth, burn up on reentry, or it's going to bounce off the atmosphere because it comes close. But if there is a 500-yard window that it could pass through in the atmosphere, which is the perfect insert, which will make it land 35 miles off the coast of Santa Monica and create a tsunami in less than a minute that will wipe out almost half of Los Angeles, drag it out to sea, raise a giant second wave of all the buildings it tore to pieces and smash those down on the cities. It's a very small chance, but I think it's worth the mission to kind of flick that thing out of the way. You know what I mean? That's that alone would makes all of NASA's expenditures forever worth it, right? I had that conversation with my son last week when he had a teacher who was going off about why are we spending money on space when we could? Well, I'll tell you why. Because if we can divert the one asteroid that would kill us all, it pays for itself. Yeah. Because there is no economy if we're all cinders.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's never mind the ARC project where we can get off this log. So, if we ever treat it that terribly where it's okay, enough of you guys, which it very well may, because it snowed in Vegas this week, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. So, where were we? Oh, yes, the rope-a-dope. So, it has become abundantly clear that at least under Vladimir Putin in Russia, the idea was play nice, but hide the knife. And ultimately, whether Deng Xiaoping, that was his plan or not, or whether he even thought it was viable, it was definitely part of the philosophy that was coming out of the CCP in the 80s and 90s, especially. into the 2000s. Once Xi Jinping got in, Xi Jinping is largely the Vladimir Putin of China.
Okay.
He talks about Taiwan the way, Putin talks about Ukraine. The difference is Ukraine at one point was part of the USSR. It was still its own country. They just decided to make it a state, and then it went back to being its own country. Taiwan, for the record, and I don't know why people aren't aware of this, is not now and has never been under the CCP as a governance. It has never, ever been under the Chinese government as it stands. Ever. The Nationalist Party fled to Taiwan and started their own government there specifically. The one China policy is about ethnicity largely for the West, because in a racially homogenous country, that's how the West tends to think about countries like that, because that's how they think of themselves. And increasingly, China thinks of itself as not a Chinese country, but a Han Chinese country. In the same way that, you and I couldn't make a distinction between Germans and and Bavarian Germans and Austro-Germans and whatever, but the Germans sure did in the late 30s. They are making that distinction right now. And I think the world is finally waking up to this. We got to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to see if I can play this audio without it killing us all, of Bill Browder talking about why the West has slow-walked our support for Ukraine as far as weapons. And it's partly because our empathy is weaponized against us. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide, now with 100% more Johnny Million.
That's me.
Mm-hmm.